He betrayed me. I forgave him. I stayed. But what he doesn't know is that my heart now belongs to someone else. Someone who never made any promises, but somehow made me feel like I still mattered. I used to think betrayal was the worst thing that could happen in a marriage. But the truth is, staying together when there's no love left, that's the real hell. You want to know why I didn't leave, and why I caught feelings while still being his wife? Stay with me and hear the whole story. One that's real, and more than just painful. We live in a 2-story wooden house in the northern suburbs of Texas, about a 30-minute drive from downtown. It's a quiet neighborhood, full of young families, neatly lined trees, and the occasional barking of dogs echoing from neighbors' backyards. I'm 36. My husband is 38. We've been married for 12 years and have a son named Luke. He's 10 and in 5th grade. Every morning, I drop him off at school before heading to the office. My husband is usually in more of a rush. He travels a lot for work, sometimes to Boston, sometimes to Denver. We each have our own routines, but still manage to have dinner together a few times a week. Not a passionate marriage, but a stable one. At least, that's what I used to believe. I don't remember exactly when I started getting suspicious. Maybe it was when he stopped leaving his phone on the table like he used to. Or when he started coming home late, but didn't seem tired like before. Maybe it was that one time I joked, "Don't forget to grab some milk," as he headed out the door, and he just gave a distracted nod without even looking at me. Sometimes I told myself I was just tired, overthinking. But there's one thing I've always believed. When a woman feels something's off, it usually is. I didn't follow him. I didn't check his phone. I didn't track his location. I just noticed. And then one afternoon, while gathering his clothes to do laundry, I saw his wallet lying on his desk. Just an old habit. I opened it to see if he had any cash so I could tuck in a few bills. But instead, I found a hotel receipt from Austin 2 weeks ago, the same day he said he was in back-to-back meetings with clients. The receipt was clear. 1 night, double room, paid with his card. I set the wallet down like it had thorns. What I felt wasn't shock, it was emptiness. Like my brain hadn't caught up yet, and my heart refused to believe it. That night, after Luke was in bed, I sat across from him at the dinner table. I didn't dance around it. "That hotel receipt in Austin, what was it?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye, my voice strangely calm. He looked up, took about 3 seconds to register what I meant, then gave a small nod. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was just one time." Just one time. I didn't scream. I didn't get up. I didn't throw a plate. I just sat there listening to each word hit the floor like crumbling bricks. I used to think that if I were ever betrayed, I'd lose it. I'd scream in his face, kick over a chair, set the whole place on fire. But when it actually happened, I felt just one thing: drained. I got up, walked into the bathroom, took off my clothes, turned on the water, showered like it was any other day. The hot water ran down my back, but I didn't feel a thing. Not cold, not warm, just nothing except the emptiness. The next morning, I still got up early, made breakfast, took my son to school, as if the night before had never happened. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't leave either. I started to feel like a side character in my own life. No lines, no major actions. Just there, so the story could keep moving. He didn't say anything else. I didn't ask. Between us was a silence, an empty space neither of us wanted to look at. Sometimes I'd watch him folding shirts in the bedroom and think, I used to love that man. Used to feel my heart race when he hugged me from behind. Used to believe we were inseparable. Now, he feels like a stranger I happen to live with, for reasons I haven't quite named yet. I'm not sure if I'm hurting because he betrayed me, or because I'm not hurting the way I thought I would. That feeling is scarier than any kind of anger. Every night, I sit by the window, staring out at the backyard. My son still laughs, still plays with his dad. We're still a family. But it's a family standing on a frozen lake, beautiful, still, and so fragile that one wrong step could send us crashing into the freezing dark beneath. I knew, from that moment on, I was no longer the same wife. Not the woman who used to look at him with admiration. I was a different version of myself, clearer, colder, and no longer a believer in us. I didn't leave, but I wasn't really there anymore, at least, not in spirit. That morning, I still got up early and made breakfast like always. Scrambled eggs, toast, a bit of fruit for Luke. I woke him up, checked his backpack, and waved goodbye as he walked out the door. Everything looked exactly the same as every other day. But inside, I knew I was running on autopilot. My husband is trying. I can see it. He cleans up around the house, takes me out to dinner, sends midday texts like, "You okay?" One day I came home to find a new vase of flowers on the dining table. Another time he bought movie tickets, for a genre I like, not his. I nodded, went with him, made small talk. But inside, nothing changed. Still empty. Not because I wasn't trying to forgive, but because I didn't even know what I was supposed to forgive anymore. I tried seeing a therapist. She sat across from me, notebook in hand, voice soft like a breeze. I sat in silence for almost 10 minutes before I finally said, "I don't know what I'm doing." She nodded, wrote something down. I left that first session without booking another. One Thursday evening, I forgot Luke's lunchbox at the office, so I turned the car around. I figured I'd run in, grab it, and head right back. But as soon as I walked into the building, I saw him, my husband, standing in the lobby near the front desk on the first floor. He wasn't alone. He was hugging a woman. Not a casual hug, not a friendly arm around the shoulder kind of thing. It was real, close, familiar, and long. I stood there, just a few feet away, keys still in my hand. They didn't see me. I watched long enough to know this wasn't a one-time mistake. I turned around, didn't bother picking up the lunchbox, and drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before heading home. I didn't ask, didn't confront him, didn't scream. I just shoved the feeling deeper down, like it was a stone I didn't have time to pick up. When I got home, he was already there, sitting at the dinner table, asking if I'd had a long day. I said, no. And that was the first time I lied to him without feeling guilty. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time, even more blatant. I was at the mall with Luke on a Saturday afternoon. While my son was in the restroom, I happened to spot him, my husband, walking out of the movie theater area. He wasn't alone. He was holding another woman's hand. Not the same woman as before. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. The way they walked side by side, whispered something to each other, then laughed together. Just like we used to. A long time ago. That night when he came home, I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't say what I'd seen. I just looked at him like I was staring at a stranger who'd borrowed my husband's face to live in my house. I told Haley. She screamed over the phone, "What are you waiting for? To catch him in bed with someone so you'll finally have a reason to leave?" I stayed quiet. Maybe I wasn't waiting for anything. Maybe I was just learning how to feel nothing. One night, I sat down at my desk and made a list. Reasons to leave. I wrote down 9. All of them made sense. All of them were solid. But after staring at that piece of paper for 5 minutes, I tore it into pieces. Then I scooped them up, tossed them into the toilet, and flushed. I started taking on more projects at work. Picked up extra duties for someone on maternity leave. Volunteered for short business trips, even though I've never liked being away from home. I wasn't doing it for the money. I just didn't want to be home before 8 p.m. The empty office was the only place I didn't have to pretend I was okay. My husband asked me if I'd been tired lately. I said, just the usual. He suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us. I smiled faintly, shook my head, told him I had a project to finish. He didn't push it. Maybe we both already knew where this was headed, but neither of us had the courage to be the first to say it out loud. At dinner, Luke asked me a question. "Do you still love Dad?" I froze. I asked him, "Why do you ask that?" He shrugged, didn't look at me, and said, "I don't know, you smile different now." I turned away, pretending to get a glass of water. My heart hurt, not because of the question, but because I didn't know how to answer it truthfully. Not to him, not to myself. I wasn't jealous anymore, wasn't even sad. I just couldn't remember the last time I felt like I was really living. I don't remember the exact day I first met Alex. I just remember he was sitting across from me in the meeting room with the tech team, where we were discussing the rollout of a new internal system for the company. I was invited as the HR rep to give feedback on the interface and user experience. He was the lead on the vendor side. Not flashy, not trying to impress anyone, but there was something steady about the way he listened and carefully took notes on every comment. I didn't pay much attention to him at first. My mind had no space for strangers back then. But after a few more meetings, I caught myself watching him longer than I needed to. Maybe it was the way he spoke, brief but never blunt. Maybe it was his eyes, not avoiding, not probing, just honest. One day, after a meeting that dragged on for over 2 hours, as I stood up to gather my notes, Alex suddenly asked, "Why do you always seem like you're somewhere else?" I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, gave a small smile. "It's just, you look at people like you're seeing through them. Like you're not really here. I laughed, not loudly, not politely. It was real, a light, unexpected sound. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since I last heard my own laugh. From that day on, I started noticing Alex more. He didn't flirt, didn't try to start side conversations, didn't send emails outside of work. But every time he was near, I felt more awake. I breathed deeper. I focused better. Some people don't have to say much. Their presence alone makes you want to pay attention. One late afternoon, after a meeting, it started to drizzle. I walked toward the parking lot without an umbrella. Alex caught up to me, just a few steps behind, and without a word, gently placed his jacket over my head. "Don't let your hair get wet, you'll catch a cold," he said. Then he walked off toward his own car, shoulders getting soaked, like it was the most natural thing in the world to do. I stood there, a tightness in my chest, an old feeling, but one that didn't belong to the life I was living now. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I chose a light blue blouse instead of the worn-out beige one. I dabbed on a little perfume, something I hadn't done in months. Not to get anyone's attention, just because I wanted to do something for me. I didn't tell anyone. Not Haley, and definitely not myself. I didn't admit to anything. I just started arriving at the office a little earlier, happened to make coffee at the same time as him in the break room, asked a few casual work-related questions, but underneath it all, there was a layer of emotion quietly stirring, something I kept trying to hold back. One night, I dreamt about Alex. It wasn't a bold dream. Nothing crossed any lines. We were just sitting in a park, in soft sunlight. He reached out, lightly touched my hand, then held it. No words, no rush. But that hand, that simple, warm touch, felt more real than anything I'd experienced in a long time. I woke up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. Not out of fear, but because, for the first time in a while, I felt alive. I started to feel my own presence in every step I took. Even the sound of my fingers typing at work felt sharper, more alive. Sometimes, I caught myself smiling without realizing it, just from remembering the way Alex looked at me during our last meeting. I scolded myself right after. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed, quiet, steady, undeniable. I still came home, still sat at the dinner table with my husband and son, still asked Luke how school was. I kept playing my part, doing what needed to be done. But inside I knew, a tiny part of me had started to detach. A small piece was waking up again, slowly, gently, but surely. I didn't cheat, but if just thinking about someone else can make my heart beat faster, then what kind of person does that make me? You tell me. I tried to create distance. Stopped going to the tech team's floor unless it was absolutely necessary. Avoided overlapping lunch hours. Cut down the time I spent at the break area, where I used to casually run into Alex. I thought that if I made the effort to avoid him, the feelings would eventually fade. But then there were days I came into the office and realized he wasn't there, and my heart skipped for no reason at all. The scariest part wasn't that I was looking for him. It was the quiet disappointment when he wasn't around, the kind I couldn't admit to anyone, not even to myself. One evening, after Luke had gone to bed, my husband sat down next to me in the living room. No small talk, no build-up, just, we should go somewhere, just the three of us. Like hit reset. I nodded. Not because I wanted to. It was a reflex, like nodding when someone hands you a glass of water you didn't ask for. The trip was planned quickly. 3 days at a quiet lakeside resort. We got in the car Friday morning. Luke brought his toys, asking a million questions on the way. I answered him, smiled, played the role of the steady mom. My husband drove, glancing at me now and then, like he was searching for some kind of signal. But I didn't send any. The trip felt like a slow-motion reel. We didn't fight, no raised voices, but there were no touches, no hand-holding, no natural hugs either. Dinner was filled with hollow conversations. The photos we took had Luke in the middle, my husband and I on either side, like distant relatives posing out of duty. Everything was polite. Polite enough to feel cold. I watched my husband sitting by the lake, eyes fixed on his phone. He wasn't smiling, wasn't saying anything, but I could tell he was lost in thought. And I no longer cared what those thoughts were. I started to wonder, what does it mean to keep a family together? If it's already broken inside, if all we're holding on to is the shell of something, what good does that do for a child growing up between two adults who aren't really a couple anymore? On our last night, after Luke had fallen asleep, the two of us sat on the bench outside our cabin. He said, "Thank you for trying." I turned to look him in the eye. There was something there, maybe sadness, maybe regret, but I didn't feel anything. Not moved, not hurt. I just nodded, like checking off a box. Back home, I slipped back into the rhythm of work. That night while I was folding laundry, Luke walked into the room. He stood there for a moment, then said quietly, "Mom, your smile's different now, not like before." I froze, didn't know what to say. My heart skipped in a way that wasn't pain, just pressure, tight and sharp. I sat down and pulled him close. "You think so?" He nodded, eyes avoiding mine. Then he walked away. And I just sat there, one question echoing in my head. Should I be proud that he's so perceptive, or feel guilty that he can sense the cracks I've tried so hard to hide? A few weeks later, I was invited to a small internal company event. A light networking evening. Nothing formal. I wore a simple black dress, not for anyone, just because I felt the need to feel put together. I didn't expect to see Alex, but as I walked in, I spotted him across the room. He was standing next to a woman, petite, curly hair, casual posture. His girlfriend, I guessed. They looked happy, normal, not performative, just comfortable. When his eyes met mine, he gave a slight nod, a small gesture but warm. I smiled back, then turned away. I didn't feel jealous. I had no right to. But still, my chest tightened, just a small ache but sharp, like losing something I never really had. Not Alex, not a relationship, but the feeling of being seen, of being heard, of living in a version of myself that felt real. On the way home, I rolled down the car window and let the wind slap my face. Inside me was a mess of nameless feelings. Not pain, not joy, not relief, just a kind of lingering existence with no way out. I started to wonder. If I stay for my child, am I teaching him how to live without happiness? I thought for a long time before texting Alex. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't even know what I was looking for. In the end, I wrote a single line. "If you have time, I'd like to meet to say thank you." He replied almost instantly. A simple location, the park on the west side of the city. Saturday morning, I arrived a little early. Wore a light jacket, brought a bottle of water, no makeup, no lipstick. I didn't want to show up as a woman on a date. I just wanted to show up as someone who needed to breathe. Just once, the right way. Alex was already there when I arrived, sitting on a stone bench near the lake. He smiled, stood up, and greeted me with a small nod. We sat down, at a distance that felt natural. Not too close to raise questions, not too far to feel cold. After a few minutes of quiet, he turned to me and asked, "Are you okay?" I looked at him, then answered honestly, "I don't know yet." The words came out light, but maybe they were the truest ones I'd said in months. We sat there, not saying much, just two strangers with some unspoken connection, watching the still surface of the lake. I told him about my marriage. Not in detail, not dramatically, just enough to admit to myself, more than to him, that these things really did happen. I told him about discovering the betrayal, about the silence I kept, about the days I couldn't remember what I was even living for. Alex didn't interrupt. He didn't look at me with pity. He didn't offer advice. When I finished, he simply said, "Sometimes standing still is also a way of choosing a path." I looked at him and nodded. It didn't make things lighter, but it made me feel seen. We sat there a while longer. No hand-holding, no lingering looks, just two people sharing a quiet space, not pretending to be anything. When I left the park, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel stirred. What remained was a deep kind of calm, a feeling I hadn't known in a long, long time. That night, I came home and stepped into Luke's room. He was fast asleep, one hand clutching the edge of his blanket. I sat beside his bed, gently ran my fingers through his hair. In that moment, I felt that everything I had tried to hold together had its reason. But I also knew, if I live only for the reasons, not the feelings, then that's not a life I ever want to hand down to my child, as an example. I walked out of his room and saw my husband on the sofa, watching the same familiar show. He looked at me and gave a small smile, like everything was fine. I smiled back, just as small, like a nod to a role I no longer needed to keep playing. I didn't tell him I met with Alex, not out of fear, just because it didn't matter anymore. I'm no longer willing to stay, but I'm not quite ready to leave either. I'm standing in the middle. A strangely still place. No pressure, no escape, just stillness. I opened my laptop and created a new file. Named it Me, not Us. No family photos, no weekend plans, just small bullet points of things I used to love, things I'd forgotten. Take a drawing class, try yoga. Buy back the old guitar I once meant to learn at 25. None of these will save a marriage. But maybe, just maybe, they can save a person. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe I'll stay a little longer. Maybe I'll slowly move out. But one thing I know for sure. I'm done living a lie. No more playing the role of wife. No more trying just out of duty. No more shutting down the real parts of me just to keep everything looking right. I'm choosing to be real with myself, even if that's the hardest choice. Right now, my mind is a mess. Can you give me one piece of advice? What should I do at this moment? Should I end this relationship and look for new happiness? Because deep down, I've always wanted my child to have a full family, both parents living under one roof. Your advice might help me, and maybe someone else, find a new way forward.